Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Drita Dhami. I'm Director of Operations at ReGDesk. Thanks for joining us today. The goal for today's discussion is to understand China's drug registration process and the recent changes to the drug regulations. A brief intro into who we are. We offer a suite of cutting-edge intelligence solutions to enable healthcare companies to remain one step ahead of the regulatory changes and risks globally. We can address any issues or questions you may have about your product for any given market fast. We're a trusted intelligence source for Fortune 100 companies and small to medium-sized companies around the world. With us today, we have a leading expert from China, Ms. Stephanie Chen. Stephanie holds a degree in pharmacy from Fudan University. She has over 25 years of experience in regulatory affairs, both in pharmaceuticals and medical devices. She's previously worked for J&J and Lind Healthcare, and she now runs a consulting company in China. Some of her firm's clients include Medtronic, 3M, and Juniper Pharmaceuticals. Her company specializes in GMP inspections and regulatory approvals for drugs and devices in China. Before we begin our discussion this morning, I'd like to turn our attention to our attendees. Thank you so much for joining us. At the end of this meeting, we'll be holding a brief Q&A. We encourage your participation. If you would please refer to the chat button at the top of your screen. In the interest of time, we ask that you submit your questions throughout the course of our talk, and we will try to address as many of your questions as we can. In today's conversation with Stephanie, we'll discuss an overview of drug registrations, GMP inspections, and clinical trials in China. We'll talk about the new changes to the drug regulations, and lastly, some parting tips. Ms. Chen, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Hi.
So let's begin by getting an overview of drug registration in China. Can you summarize the registration process in a few general steps for us?
There are usually three main steps for drug registration in China. First is running preclinical studies. Second involves clinical trials. Third is evaluation and approval.
And how complex is it to register drugs in China?
Slow is the best word to describe a drug registration in China. In August 2015, the Deputy Director of CFDA described the current drug registration system in a CFDA press conference. This is what he said. The current requirements for drug standards are low. The organization's management is poor. The evaluation and approval process does not run smoothly. The structure of the evaluation and the approval system is irrational, and the whole operation system is adapted. The Deputy Director also stated that CFDA is trying to improve the system and the process, but it will take time. Therefore, CFDA has been working diligently to implement a lot of new regulations and guidelines. We are looking forward to an improved drug registration process.
So the drug registration process, how long does it take on average?
Before 2016, the average cycle time of generic drug registration was around 7 years. Some new drugs even took 15 or more years. The preclinical study may take 1 to 2 years. Clinical trial approval may take 2 to 3 years. The clinical study cycle time will depend on the protocol. The final step, which is the evaluation and approval process, may take about 3 to 5 years. According to CFDA data, in 2014, the average evaluation cycle time was 2 to 4 years. In other countries, such as US, Europe, and Japan, the number is around 1 year to 1.5 years.
7 years to even 15 for drug approval. That's unbelievable. How can a foreign drug manufacturer register their drugs then?
The applicant must be the legal manufacturer of the drug in the original country. The original manufacturer cannot apply for the drug registration in China directly. They must authorize their local office in China or an outside agency which is registered in China to apply for the drug registration.
So is the drug registration process different for foreign manufacturers compared to domestic manufacturers?
The requirements and the processes are the same. The only difference is all the foreign drug registrations should go through Central FDA. After the drug gets approval from Central FDA, the foreign drugs require drug testing and drug standard review, which are provided by the Port Institution of Food and Drug Control.
What is the CFDA doing to improve the current drug registration process in that case?
CFDA announced a couple of policies to try to adjust the registration system for it to be more reasonable and to improve the evaluation process to make it more efficient. This is what CFDA has done so far. Implemented the policy of marketing authorization holder, implement the policy of innovation drug spatial examination and approval, adjust the generic drug evaluation policy to make it more reasonable, combine drug review. The drug excipients and packaging materials are now reviewed together with the drug and needn't to go through a separate process. Increased submission document requirements and increased registration fee. Strict inspections and audits will be done on manufacturing sites and clinical trial sites. This is a separate process. The manufacturing sites is audited by the CFDA. The clinical trial site will be audited with both the CFDA as well as the National Health and Family Planning Commissions. As this is a complicated process, both agencies combine together to provide the clinical trial site audits. Manufacturers must ensure to compliance for GMP and GCPs.
Great, that's a lot of information. Let's talk a little bit about the various new regulations that have come up in the last several months to a year. So the CFDA implemented the policy for marketing authorization holders, and they are trying this out currently in 10 provinces and cities in China. Can you give us a brief introduction on this new regulation?
Yes, this regulation is currently being tried in 10 provinces and cities until November the 4th, 2018. This regulation is to separate the product license and manufacturing license administration. This means that the company who owns the product license can also authorize a different company to hold a drug manufacturing license and GMP certificates. For example, a large US company can hire a local Chinese company to manufacture their drugs in China. The marketing authorization holder may take full responsibility of drug safety, efficacy, and drug quality. Marketing authorization holder is a common administration model in the world. The China Marketing Authorization Holder regulations is trying to approach the new change to match the global drug administration standard. The most important improvement of this regulation is a single person can now apply to be the marketing authorization holder. Before this regulation, all applicant of drug registration had to be an agency which held a company registered in China. This is a very new and difficult change. Since CFDA does not have the experience to manage a single person as an applicant, the related processes and guidelines do not support this as well. We are looking forward to having CFDA publish the related rules and guides in the near future.
Great, and when we do, I'm sure that we will be able to inform everyone, you and RegDesk together. Moving on to the next new regulation, can you highlight some important changes for the 2016 drug classification guidance?
The classifications from the 2016 chemical drug classification guidance are: Class 1 drugs are innovative original drugs that never launched anywhere in the world. Class 2 drugs are the new and optimized drugs that never launched anywhere in the world. Class 3 are generics that the original drug have never been launched in China. Class 4 are the generics that the original drugs have been launched in China. Class 5 are drugs which have been launched in other countries and apply China registration. The most important change is that the new chemical drug classification defines the innovative drug and optimized drug. Actually, in the previous Class 1, almost all the new drugs are only reformed the chemical structures, very little original innovative drugs. So the new classification identifies the innovation drugs and the optimized drugs. The original innovation drugs are new Class 1, and this is approaching with the global classification standard. So the most of the previous Class 1 drugs are now considered Class 2. All foreign drugs that have launched in other countries are now classified as Class 5.
I understand. So for most of our clients in that case, most of their submissions will be Class 5 drugs. Onto the third new change, the CFDA also announced the priority review for certain categories of drugs, including those for children and the elderly, rare diseases, AIDS, malignant tumors, and viral hepatitis. Can you elaborate on some of these changes that have been made or are still pending?
In order to encourage some specific drug research and development, as well as adjust the evaluation process to become more efficient, CFDA issued a policy to prioritize certain specific drug registration intended for urgent clinical use. This policy has been implemented since November 2015. CFDA response cycle time of these registrations will now be reduced from several years to several months. The drugs you mentioned are the part of the drugs which are listed for priority review. Besides these, there are drugs that fall under the category of innovative drugs and traditional Chinese drugs. A few other drugs are also included, such as drugs for which there exists a shortage in the market, drugs whose patent was expired in the past 3 years. Foreign drugs that have transferred manufacturing to China.
Great. So I'd like to move our discussion now to clinical trials, as I know that is a hot topic for many of our clients here at ReGDesk. Are local clinical trials absolutely necessary? Can clients submit clinical data from other markets, such as the US and the EU?
The foreign drugs may require a local clinical trial in China. Drugs that have never been approved anywhere in the world. Drug launched in original country, but is entering China for the first time. Both traditional Chinese medicines and biological products require local clinical trials, even if there are similar products launched in China. Approved foreign drugs, which are aimed for extended indication and usage. Some drugs do not require local clinical trials. They just require bioequivalence evaluation instead. In this case, the foreign pharmaceutical company should submit the clinical study evaluation to CFDA. These documents should be the same as the ones they submit for drug registration in the original country. CFDA may accept results from an international multi-center clinical trial that includes China. In this case, the pharmaceutical company should submit the complete protocol and report, not just the Chinese part.
I know when we last spoke that you shared with me that foreign CROs have been having a bit of trouble in China. So will the CFDA accept clinical study data provided by a CRO? Will they accept the data from a foreign CRO company?
Yes, CFDA does accept clinical studies provided by a CRO. However, the foreign CRO companies should have a sub-company registered in China. Recently, CFDA found that many CROs and pharmaceutical companies have been non-compliant with GCPs and process monitoring, and many CROs have been submit the false data. This situation is becoming more and more common. Therefore, in July 2015, CFDA carried out very strict inspection on clinical trials. CFDA announced if there is any false data found in clinical trial submission documents, the drug registration will be rejected. Moreover, pharmaceutical company will not be allowed to reapply for clinical trial approval for 1 year. CFDA has asked pharmaceutical companies to first perform a self-inspection and has suggested the company withdraw the drug registration if any issues are found. As for December 2015, 46% of applications have been withdrawn. CFDA has been performing GCP audits and has blacklisted many CROs and hospitals. CFDA has published this blacklist. As for September 2016, CFDA checked 117 registration applications, which didn't withdraw their applications after the new regulations, and still found 30 applications that had issues in the clinical study. These applications have been rejected, and of these 27 applications, 11 CROs and hospitals were deals with an official CFDA investigation.
That's a lot of information. I, for one, I know prior to speaking with you, was not so aware about the issues that the CROs were having in China, our foreign CROs. So, moving on from that, how does the CFDA oversee GMPs for foreign pharmaceutical companies?
According to foreign drug registration policy, the pharmaceutical companies should submit their GMP approval documents in their original countries as part of the application process. After the drug is launched in China, CFDA may perform on-site GMP audit when necessary. Every year, CFDA may capture information from the application, market inspection, port inspection, and customer complaints. Based on this information, they may schedule and oversee GMP audit. GMP auditors from CFDA perform the audit. For example, in 2014, one of the manufacturing sites of Pfizer in France found a non-conformity during a CFDA overseas audit. Their drugs were suspended from import to China until they performed effective corrective actions.
So then, Stephanie, once a drug is approved, can the drug manufacturer set their own pricing? And if not, how does the manufacturer get reimbursed?
In China, the drug pricing approval and reimbursement approval are totally different. A drug must get price approval first, which is determined based on enough clinical experience and data. Then they can apply for reimbursement approval. For pricing approval, according to the most up-to-date regulation in 2015, manufacturers can set their own price and needn't get approval from Development and Reform Commission. But these drugs can only be sold in drugstores. If the drug needs to be sold in government hospitals, there is a tender process held by the local provincial development and reform commission. The price negotiation process in this case is very, very complicated. As for reimbursement, there exists a national basic reimbursed drug checklist. Each province has its own checklist. Followed by the checklist, the hospitals purchase drugs and get reimbursed by the medical insurance agency. It is a complicated and difficult process to apply for a drug to be listed on the checklist. Pharmaceutical companies are encouraged to pay attention to this process.
Great. So lastly, let's discuss some of the most common mistakes and a few of your parting tips. In regards to registering their drugs in China, what would you say are some of the most common mistakes that foreign manufacturers make?
Each step in the registration process has common mistakes. For the preclinical study, please notice CFDA standards and the test methods are very different and independent. CFDA does not accept the data that manufacturers gather from other countries. In regarding to clinical trial, the manufacturer should plan their clinical trial with a global picture in mind. It is better to have multiple clinical trial centers, which include China. Then CFDA is more apt to accept the clinical data. For trial processing, I suggest that the company find a professional and responsible CRO and monitor the GCP process very carefully. For the CROs, it is very important for the pharmaceutical company to provide a periodic review and monitoring. In the evaluation and approval process, proper communications with CFDA evaluation center is very important.
So Stephanie, do you have any final parting tips for our attendees today?
Yes, actually, drug registration in China lasts a very, very long time. Through the course of the registration will be changed in the regulatory environment and even the team members submitting the document. A lot of process will be complete by different teams in different periods. So process management, communication, documentation, and cooperation are very important and challenging aspects to ensuring the successful registration.
Stephanie, thank you so much for the insights. I know that our viewers have some questions, but I also know it is 11:29, so I will try to get to a few, and if we don't get to the rest, please know that we will reach out shortly with hopefully some more additional answers. Stephanie, one of the first questions that we received was, for phase 1 clinical investigation, is a partner company in China necessary?
It depends on the manufacturer. Actually, a partner in China will be helpful.
Great. And with the upcoming changes, what happens if a drug is in the middle of the approval process in China and the regulation changes?
CFDA changed the classifications and the requirements of the process. I think there will be some change, and this kind of change will case by case to get evaluated.
So if I have a product in the middle of a submission and they change that regulation, or the classification changes yet again, however, I've already submitted my product, will it go on with the previous regulations? How will that affect my product?
If you have already submitted products with the previous classification, they will go through the previous process.
I see. Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Stephanie. I know that that's about it. We're at 11:31. To our viewers, if you have any questions specific to your product for China or any other market, please contact us. You can find my contact information right here on your screen. If you'd like to learn more about ReGDesk, we will also be hosting a brief webinar explaining our novel approach. Our next webinar series will cover the new EU directives. Please watch out for that email soon. Thanks again for your time, and I look forward to speaking to you all again.